in 1925. I attended Ysgol Sir Fechgyn, Pen-y-bont yr Ogwy. In 1939 I had the most wonderful experience, a bus trip with a group of my father's friends, all colliers working in the local colliery. The collieries at that time had come back into their own. They were now working full time. And the men on his face decided they would have a bus trip through mid-Wales. It was a Saturday morning. I remember well waiting outside the local Labour Club while the men inside had a few drinks to start their day off. They loaded crates of bottled beer onto the bus and we set off. We first of all had to go to Outing.2, where the garage for the bus was, and the driver had to report to his boss. Outing.2 boasted a tremendous viaduct. I hadn't seen such a thing before, and I was most impressed. We then went up over the hills onto the Brecon Beacons. It is unfenced mountain land on which sheep and some feral ponies graze. We were lucky in that there was a sheep collection going on, and the road was covered in thousands of sheep, or it appeared to be thousands. And as the bus came along, the shepherds, mounted on their little mountain ponies, drove the sheep up the mountain, but the sheep were restrained by a line of dogs that kept them in order, and it appeared to be that for a mile or so in front of us there was this long ribbon of sheep. After having left this magnificent sight behind, we came across a gentleman who had run over a dog on a little river bridge. The colliers, being dog fanciers, all got off the bus to throw the car and its driver, if he wanted it, into the river below. But the bus driver persuaded them that if they did so, they would damage his license. So in consideration of his problem, they got back on the bus and we sang our way to Llandovery. Now, singing in Wales at that time was a solemn affair. The joyous songs were mainly chapel hymns, sung with gusto, lots of hallelujahs. At Llandovery, the miners went into the local pub, the Black Ox. I, as a child, not allowed there. It was quite strict in our area. The children did not frequent public houses. So I sat on the seat, on the steps of the bus with the bus driver. All of the men bought me an ice cream wafer. So I sat on the bus with a pile of melting wafers, ice cream dripping everywhere, and the driver and I did our best to demolish the lot. After having refreshed themselves, we were back on the bus and off to Ammanford, where tea had been arranged. Now then, at Ammanford, in this restaurant, we all sat down and they had fish knives, spatula type fish knives. None of us had seen these things before. I was sitting facing the driver, whose back was towards the men, and one of the men said, "Well, what do we do with this?" And someone said, "Well, watch the boy." The boy had passed his 11 plus, so he must know. I watched the driver, the men watched me, and we navigated a fish tea. We then went on to Ammanford, where the weekend or the Saturday fair was taking place, and the miners bought faggots and pig's trotters and deposited them in my lap. And they went off, had a few more drinks, rejoined the bus. When we got to Port Talbot on the way home, several of them decided to carry on with the proceedings, but the rest of us just stayed on the bus. And that would have been the end of the day, apart from the fact that I presented my mother with a pile of pig's trotters and a pile of faggots, enough to feed the neighbourhood. Now this wasn't the end of the story, because the following morning there were people knocking at the door asking, "Could we please have our faggots, Mrs. Jones, and pig's trotters?" And off they went. Many years later, standing at a bus stop in Port Talbot, I met one of the men who had been on this trip, a man called William Williams, known as Will Dribble. And Will and I talked about fish knives in Ammanford. That's the end of my story.